What happened that night showed the difference between noise and leadership, and Barack Obama made sure no one missed it. The air in Washington that evening carried a sense of quiet anticipation, the kind that always comes before something unforgettable. The city was glowing, its grand buildings dressed in light, as a special event drew leaders, diplomats, and journalists from all corners of the country. Inside one of the most elegant halls of the Capitol, a large banner stretched across the stage, Building America's Future. It wasn't just another political gathering. This was a historic moment, a night that had somehow managed to bring together two men who could not be more different in their beliefs, their style, and their vision for America. On one side stood President Donald Trump, the current leader of the nation, bold, outspoken, and unfiltered. On the other stood former President Barack Obama, calm, measured, and known for his thoughtful presence. Both were invited as chief guests, each expected to deliver a speech on the nation's challenges and the path forward. It sounded simple enough on paper, but everyone in that room knew this wasn't going to be a normal evening. The tension between Trump and Obama had been public for years. Their rivalry wasn't built only on politics. It was personal. Trump had built much of his political image by criticizing Obama, questioning his policies, mocking his leadership, and even spreading conspiracy theories about his background. Obama, on the other hand, had mostly responded with quiet dignity, rarely lowering himself to Trump's level. But tonight, they would share the same stage, the same spotlight, and the same audience. That alone made the atmosphere electric. The hall itself looked stunning. Red carpets, chandeliers shining like 1,000 stars, and cameras pointed from every direction. Guests whispered softly, glancing at the two front-row seats where the men of the hour would soon sit. When the host announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama," the entire room stood and applauded. Obama walked in wearing a dark suit and his signature composed smile. He didn't wave dramatically or play to the cameras. He simply nodded, acknowledging the crowd with that effortless grace people had missed since he left office. A few moments later, the next announcement followed. "Please welcome the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump." The applause was loud again, but different, mixed with murmurs and tension. Trump entered confidently, flashing his familiar grin, waving broadly to the crowd. He stopped midway to shake hands with a few guests, soaking in the attention like a performer on stage. When the two men finally stood near each other, it was like watching fire and water meet. Obama nodded politely. Trump gave a small smirk. There was no handshake. Cameras clicked non-stop, capturing the moment every news outlet would soon replay endlessly. They took their seats beside each other. For a brief second, silence filled the hall. Not because of respect, but because everyone was trying to read their faces. What were they thinking? What would they say to each other? Behind the calm surface, there was history. Years of criticism, taunts, and political battles. Trump had spent much of his presidency undoing Obama's policies. From health care reforms to environmental protections and international agreements. To some, it looked like a political strategy. To others, it looked personal, as if Trump wanted to erase every trace of Obama's time in power. Obama knew this, of course, but he never fought back with anger. Instead, he spoke occasionally about leadership, compassion, and truth. Words that often felt like quiet responses to Trump's loudest claims. Now, for the first time in a long while, they would face each other not through interviews or statements, but in person, live in front of the world. As the opening remarks ended, the host introduced Obama as the first speaker. He rose from his seat, adjusted his suit jacket, and walked to the podium. The crowd went silent again, not out of formality, but because they wanted to hear what he would say, especially with Trump sitting just a few steps away. Obama's voice carried a calm strength as he began to speak. He thanked the organizers, the audience, and yes, even the current president. His tone was steady, his rhythm deliberate. There was no bitterness, no sharpness, just clarity. He started by painting a picture of where the country stood, the challenges it faced, the changes it needed, and the importance of working together. He spoke about his time in office not as a list of accomplishments, but as lessons learned. He talked about how unity, fairness, and hard work could overcome even the toughest times. Every word felt genuine. Even those who didn't always agree with his politics found themselves nodding. Obama had a gift. He didn't just speak, he made people feel seen. Trump sat watching, his expression hard to read. Sometimes he glanced around the room. Other times he looked straight at Obama. The contrast between them was striking. Obama's words flowed smoothly, carefully chosen. Trump's reputation, on the other hand, was built on saying whatever came to mind, sharp, fast, and loud. Obama spoke of progress, hope, and building bridges instead of walls. He mentioned the importance of respect in leadership, how power means nothing without empathy. Some in the crowd exchanged looks. They knew those lines were meant for more than just the audience. When Obama finished, the applause was thunderous. People rose from their seats. Some clapped out of admiration, others out of relief, because for a moment, the room felt united by something bigger than politics. But as Obama walked back to his seat, the applause began to fade. Trump was staring straight ahead, his expression firm, almost unreadable. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Pride, anger, maybe both. He leaned slightly toward the microphone in front of him, waiting for the crowd to settle. The host tried to keep the mood light, announcing Trump as the next speaker. But deep down, everyone could feel it. The air had changed. The battle lines were drawn, and the calm before the storm was officially over. The audience didn't yet know it. But what would follow wasn't just another speech. It would become one of the most talked about confrontations in modern political history, one that no one in that grand hall would ever forget. As Barack Obama stood before the microphone, the entire hall seemed to still itself. The sound of camera shutters slowed, the chatter faded into silence. For a brief moment, time seemed to pause, every eye fixed on the man who once led the nation through crisis and change. Obama began softly, his voice carrying that familiar steadiness that had once calmed millions through television screens. He didn't rush his words. He spoke as though each sentence had weight, carefully chosen, deliberate, and meant to reach not just the ears, but the hearts of those listening. He started by reflecting on how far America had come. He spoke about the years of struggle after the economic crash, the slow rebuilding of trust, and how communities worked hand in hand to create opportunity again. He reminded people of the importance of compassion, not as a political ideal, but as a basic human value. The strength of a nation, he said, is not measured by how loudly its leaders speak, but by how much they listen to their people. The crowd leaned in. The sentence echoed through the hall like a quiet thunder. It wasn't just about politics. It was about leadership, humanity, and humility, qualities that many felt were missing in the current political climate. Obama went on to speak about unity. He talked about the power of working together despite differences, how America had always been at its best when its people stood side by side, not against each other. His words carried a deep sense of hope, but also a quiet warning. When we let fear divide us, we forget who we are. And when we forget who we are, we lose what makes this nation truly great. His tone was calm, but his message was sharp. It didn't attack anyone directly, but everyone knew who it was aimed at. The idea of division, of fear being used as a tool, was something that had become far too familiar under Trump's leadership. Trump sat at the long table to Obama's right, his face mostly unreadable, but his fingers tapped on the table in slow, tight rhythms. He didn't look at Obama much, but everyone could feel the tension building between them. Obama, unfazed, continued. He shifted his focus to some of the key issues facing the country: healthcare, education, and climate change. He spoke about the importance of empathy in policymaking. Behind every number, he said, there's a person, a mother who needs care for her child, a worker who deserves a fair wage, a student who dreams of something better. His tone deepened with emotion as he reminded the audience that the Affordable Care Act, a law that had helped millions of Americans, wasn't just a political victory. It was a moral one. It was proof that government could still be a force for good, that leadership could still mean service, and that compassion could still shape policy. He paused for a moment, scanning the audience. Then, in his steady, almost teacher-like way, he added, "The progress we made didn't come easy. And it won't survive if we keep tearing down what others have built just because we didn't build it ourselves." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. It was a polite way of saying what many had been thinking, that Trump's presidency seemed obsessed with undoing everything connected to Obama's name. Obama didn't stop there. He moved on to the global stage, reminding everyone of America's responsibility not just to itself but to the world. He spoke about leadership not as domination but as example. He said, "We lead not by force but by fairness, not by threats but by trust." It was a line that made several people in the audience exchange glances. Diplomats in the crowd nodded subtly. Obama's words carried the weight of experience. They came from someone who had spent years balancing diplomacy with integrity. But what made Obama's speech so powerful wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. His calm, his pauses, his steady gaze. They drew the audience in like a storyteller who didn't need drama to hold attention. He painted pictures with his words of families sitting around dinner tables, of children dreaming about the future, of ordinary Americans doing extraordinary things every day. America's greatness, he said, was never built on one man's power. It was built on millions of people believing in something bigger than themselves. For a second, the camera caught Trump's face. His jaw tightened. His smile was gone. The line wasn't a direct attack, but everyone could feel its meaning. Obama wasn't just talking about America. He was talking about leadership, the kind that builds rather than boasts. Then, with a soft shift in tone, Obama began to close his speech. He thanked the audience again and spoke about hope. Hope, he said, isn't blind optimism. It's the belief that even when things seem broken, we can still fix them together. The room erupted in applause, this time louder and longer. People rose to their feet, some clapping with enthusiasm, others simply smiling, relieved to hear words that reminded them of decency and purpose. Even a few of Trump's supporters couldn't help but show appreciation. The power of Obama's words had a way of crossing lines, even when people didn't want them to. As Obama stepped back from the podium, the applause continued to echo through the hall. But behind that wave of respect, there was something else building: tension. Because everyone knew what came next. Trump was next to speak. And if there was one thing the world had learned about Donald Trump, it was that he didn't like being overshadowed, especially not by Barack Obama. Obama sat down quietly, nodding toward the audience as the cheers slowly faded. Trump adjusted his tie, staring straight ahead, his expression tightening as if preparing for battle. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. One man speaking with calm purpose, the other bracing himself to strike back. The applause died down and silence once again filled the room. The moderator cleared his throat, looking slightly uneasy as he turned to the next guest. "Thank you, President Obama," he said. "And now, please welcome the 45th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump." The crowd clapped politely, but the energy had shifted. Everyone could feel it. Something sharp was coming. Something that would turn this elegant evening into a clash the world would talk about long after the lights went out. The applause for Obama's speech was still echoing faintly when Donald Trump rose from his seat. He adjusted his jacket, smoothed his tie, and walked toward the podium with a confident swagger. His every step carried the kind of energy that demanded attention. Not the quiet confidence of Obama, but the showmanship of a man who wanted the spotlight all to himself. When he reached the microphone, he waited for the room to settle, giving a small smirk as if to say, "Now, let's get to the real show." "Thank you. Thank you," he began, his voice booming across the hall. "That was quite a nice little speech, wasn't it?" He glanced over at Obama, his tone dipped in sarcasm. A few chuckles rose from the crowd. Not genuine laughter, but uneasy attempts to fill the silence that followed. Trump continued pretending to compliment Obama. "He's always been a smooth talker, great with words. You know, a lot of people are great with words but not so great with results." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. It was clear this wasn't going to be a simple follow-up speech. From that moment, the room's atmosphere began to change. What had been polite anticipation now felt like standing on the edge of something unpredictable. Trump wasn't here to discuss policy or unity. He was here to win a moment. He leaned forward, resting both hands on the podium. "We all remember the last administration," he said. "A lot of talking, a lot of promises, but look at the mess we were left with. Terrible deals, weak borders, and jobs flying out of this country." His voice rose with each phrase. "We had to come in and fix it all big time." Some of his supporters in the audience clapped loudly. Others stayed quiet, unsure whether to cheer or wait for the punchline. Trump smiled at their reaction. "And now, of course, we have the former president here reminding us how united we used to be. Unity. Yes, unity. Except maybe for the millions of Americans who were forgotten, right?" His tone was mocking, theatrical, but beneath the performance was something sharper, a personal edge. Every word felt like it was meant not just for the crowd, but for Obama himself. He paused, glanced at him again, and added, "Some people say they love America, but you have to be born loving it." The room froze. It was an indirect jab, but everyone knew what he was referring to. The old false rumors questioning Obama's citizenship. A topic long debunked, long buried, yet somehow Trump couldn't resist dragging it back up. There was a gasp somewhere in the room. Cameras clicked rapidly. Obama didn't move, his face unreadable, but his stillness said more than words could. Trump pressed on, clearly feeding off the tension. I don't know. Maybe that's why he talks about unity so much. Maybe he's still trying to find out where he fits in." He chuckled at his own line, but the laughter in the audience was faint and scattered. It wasn't amusement. It was shock. Still, Trump didn't stop. He thrived on reaction. The more uncomfortable the room became, the more determined he seemed to stir it up. He shifted topics suddenly, jumping to his favorite theme himself. "Under my leadership," he declared, "we've seen record success. The economy, the military, the respect, all of it. America is respected again. No more weakness. No more apologizing to the world." He gestured toward Obama without naming him. "We're not bowing to anyone anymore." The irony was clear. He was speaking about strength while standing in the same room as a man who had built his entire reputation on diplomacy and calm authority. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Some of Trump's words were met with polite claps, mostly from those who were too cautious to do otherwise. But most of the audience just listened quietly. They weren't inspired. They were watching, waiting, wondering how far he would go. Then, as if realizing the crowd wasn't as responsive as he'd hoped, Trump turned sharper. "You know," he said, "it's funny. When I took office, everyone said I was obsessed with reversing his policies." He pointed a thumb toward Obama without turning his head. "They said I was trying to erase him. But tell me, what's there to erase, really?" There was a heavy silence after that line. The words hit hard not because they were clever, but because of their sheer arrogance. Obama's policies had touched millions: health care, education, climate reform. And yet, here was Trump brushing it all aside as if it were nothing. He went on, pacing the stage slightly now. "I had to fix health care. I had to clean up the mess in foreign policy. I had to rebuild the economy that was frankly collapsing under fake statistics." He laughed at his own exaggerations, but the audience didn't join in this time. Something in the room had shifted. The laughter had died. The applause had thinned. Trump's jokes were no longer landing the way he expected. It was as if the crowd had grown tired of the performance. Still, he couldn't help himself. He turned back toward Obama, narrowing his eyes slightly. "You know, I'll give him credit for one thing. He sure knows how to talk about hope." He paused, smirking. "But hope doesn't fix anything. Action does. Real action. And that's what I've been doing. Real leadership, real strength, not speeches that sound pretty." It was the kind of line Trump loved. Direct, boastful, meant to draw contrast. But in this room filled with people who had just been moved by Obama's calm, meaningful words, it sounded hollow. He tried to push further to recover the energy. "I built an economy so strong that everyone, even the people who didn't vote for me, benefited. That's something my predecessor can't say." The audience stayed quiet. The silence now was louder than any applause could have been. Trump forced a smile. "Anyway," he said, trying to regain his rhythm, "I'm sure we'll hear plenty more nice stories about how great things used to be. But let's be honest, America is finally winning again." He gave a small nod, signaling the end of his speech. The applause that followed was polite, not passionate. Some clapped out of courtesy, others because they didn't know what else to do. But the energy in the room was different now, tight, uneasy, charged. As Trump stepped away from the podium, the air was heavy. Obama sat quietly, his face composed. But there was something in his eyes, something that hinted the story wasn't over. Because while Trump believed he had seized control of the evening, what came next would prove that sometimes calm can cut deeper than anger. And Obama was about to remind everyone just how powerful composure could be. The tension in the room was thick enough to feel. Trump had just finished his speech, his final words still echoing faintly through the grand hall. The applause that followed was scattered and uncertain, not the kind of roaring approval he was used to. It sounded polite, forced, even nervous. As the audience slowly settled back into their seats, eyes began shifting toward Obama. He sat quietly, his expression calm, unreadable. For most people in that room, the night already felt heavy, but for Obama, it wasn't over. A quiet hum of conversation filled the air as the host tried to steer the event back to neutral ground. But before he could move on, a clear, steady voice rose above the noise. "Excuse me," Obama said softly, standing up. The room fell into complete silence. The calm tone of his voice made the moment even more gripping. Everyone turned. Even Trump froze mid-smile, his expression tightening as Obama stepped forward. Obama looked toward the stage, his posture straight, his presence commanding without a hint of aggression. He didn't rush or raise his voice. He simply asked, "Mr. President, may I ask you a question?" The hall grew even quieter. The question was polite, but the tone carried something behind it. The kind of stillness that comes before lightning. Trump leaned slightly toward the microphone, forcing a laugh. "Sure," he said. "Go ahead. This should be interesting." Obama nodded, and with that same calm control that had defined his entire career, he asked, "You and Ivanka secretly have children." The room erupted into gasps. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the hall. For a second, no one seemed to know what they had just heard. Cameras flashed wildly. People turned to one another, whispering, their faces a mix of confusion and shock. Trump blinked, caught off guard. "What kind of question is that?" He shot back, his voice suddenly sharper. Obama's expression didn't change. His voice remained calm, almost conversational. "I'm just curious," he said, "because you often talk about values and family, and yet your own words about your daughter have made people wonder where your boundaries truly lie." A murmur spread through the audience. Everyone knew what Obama was referring to. The past comments Trump had made about Ivanka, comments that many had found inappropriate. Obama didn't need to explain. His words hung in the air like a quiet truth everyone had tried to ignore. Trump's smile vanished completely. "That's disgusting," he said, his tone rising. "You're disgusting." But Obama didn't flinch. "No, Mr. President," he replied evenly. "What's disgusting is pretending to represent morality while crossing lines no father should ever cross." The crowd stirred again. Some looked down at their phones, others at the stage, afraid to blink and miss what was unfolding. Obama's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. Not because of anger, but because of precision. Trump stammered something about fake news, waving a hand dismissively. "You're spreading lies?" he snapped. "Everyone here knows it." Obama tilted his head slightly, a faint knowing smile on his face. "Lies?" he said. "You're sure about that? Because if we're talking about truth, we can also talk about Jared." The room exploded in noise again. Gasps, whispers, a few startled laughs that quickly died off. Trump's eyes widened. Obama continued, his tone unchanged. "You see, people make mistakes, Mr. President, but some mistakes they try very hard to hide." Trump slammed his hand on the table, his face turning red. "That's enough. This is completely inappropriate. He shouldn't even be allowed to speak right now." The host tried to calm him, but Trump wasn't listening. He turned to the event organizers, pointing angrily toward Obama. "Get him out of here right now, or this event is over." The room was chaos, voices overlapping, flashes from cameras lighting up the space like fireworks. But through it all, Obama stood perfectly still. His face showed no anger, no victory, just calm assurance. When the event's main organizer finally approached, he looked torn. With a soft voice, he said, Mr. Obama, please. It would be best if you left. We don't want things to escalate." Obama nodded once. "Of course," he said. "I wouldn't want to cause any more trouble." Then he turned back to Trump, his eyes steady. "But remember, truth doesn't disappear just because you demand it to." As Obama began walking toward the exit, the room followed him with their eyes. There was no applause now, only silence. A deep, heavy silence filled with questions no one dared to ask out loud. Trump tried to speak again, but his voice came out shaky, unsteady. "He's lying. Everyone knows he's lying," he insisted. But even as he said it, his eyes darted around the room, searching faces for support that wasn't there. Obama reached the doorway, then stopped briefly. Without turning around, he said, "Leadership isn't about hiding from your past, Mr. President. It's about owning it, no matter how uncomfortable it is." Then he walked out. The sound of the door closing behind him seemed to echo endlessly. For several long seconds, no one moved. The guests sat frozen, their expressions a mix of disbelief and awe. Some whispered that Obama had gone too far. Others whispered that he had said what no one else dared to. Trump remained at the podium, visibly shaken, his face pale beneath the bright lights. He tried to recover, forcing a smile, but the charm that usually carried him through controversy was gone. The room was no longer his. Reporters scribbled in their notepads, guests whispered, and the weight of Obama's words lingered like smoke. What had started as a polished diplomatic event had turned into something far deeper, a confrontation between composure and chaos, between truth and denial. Obama had walked out with grace, but he had left behind something powerful, a question that refused to be silenced. What did he know? And more importantly, what was Trump so desperate to hide? That night, no one had the answer, but everyone knew one thing for certain. Barack Obama had turned the tables without shouting, without anger, and without fear. In the face of mockery, he had reminded the world that sometimes the calmest voice in the room is also the most dangerous one. The air in the grand hall felt heavy after Obama's exit, like the silence that follows a thunderclap. Every conversation seemed to shrink to whispers, every movement slow and uncertain. The audience sat frozen, unsure of what to do next. The shock of what had just happened hung in the air like fog. Donald Trump stood near the podium, his face red and tight, his jaw clenched. The confidence he had carried minutes earlier seemed to waver. He glanced toward the doors through which Obama had left, his expression a mix of fury and disbelief. For a man who built his image around control and dominance, this moment cut deep. He tried to speak, clearing his throat. "That," he said, his voice echoing unevenly, "was one of the most disrespectful things I've ever seen." His tone was harsh, but his hands betrayed him, trembling slightly as he gripped the sides of the podium. The crowd watched quietly. Some nodded, others avoided eye contact altogether. Everyone seemed to understand that something bigger than a political disagreement had just unfolded. This wasn't about policies anymore. It was about pride, power, and truth, and one man struggled to contain it. Trump continued, trying to regain his footing. "I invited him here out of respect," he said, his voice growing louder, "and this is how he repays me. With lies, with insults, shameful. Absolutely shameful." He looked around for agreement, but the room didn't respond the way he hoped. There were no cheers, no applause, only uneasy glances and shifting chairs. He forced a laugh, one that didn't reach his eyes. Fake news will have a field day with this. I'm sure, he said, almost talking to himself. They'll spin it. They always do. But even as he said it, he seemed aware that this time it wasn't the press that had shaken him. It was Obama's words. The organizer of the event, a man in a navy suit with anxious eyes, stepped closer to the stage. He thanked the president for his remarks, hoping to ease the tension, but his voice trembled slightly. He tried to move the program forward, introducing the next segment, but no one was listening. The audience's attention stayed locked on Trump. Trump's face softened for a moment, almost as if he was caught between anger and fear. He looked toward the side of the room where Ivanka sat with Jared Kushner. Ivanka's expression was unreadable, her usual composed smile now replaced by something colder, more guarded. She whispered something to her husband, who nodded but didn't look up. For a brief moment, Trump's eyes met hers. It was only a second, but it was enough for everyone nearby to notice. Something passed between them, something tense, unspoken, heavy with meaning. He turned back to the crowd, trying to salvage what remained of the evening. We're here to talk about America's future, he said. And I'm focused on that, on making America stronger than ever before. Not on distractions or nonsense, but his voice lacked conviction now. The more he spoke, the less power his words seemed to carry. Obama's question, calm, cutting, and unanswered, lingered in the air like an invisible weight pressing on everyone's thoughts. The event organizer, seeing the discomfort growing, finally stepped forward again. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, trying to smile, I think we'll take a short break. The announcement broke the spell. People began whispering. Some stood, others reached for their phones, but no one was really talking about the event itself. Every whisper circled back to one thing. What had Obama meant? Was it a jab, or did he actually know something more? Trump stepped down from the podium, ignoring the cameras that trailed him. He muttered something to one of his aides, his expression stormy. He wanted to move past it, to pretend the exchange hadn't mattered, but he could feel it. The way the room's energy had shifted against him. For the first time that night, he wasn't in control. Outside the hall, as Obama's car pulled away, reporters stood in the cold air, trying to make sense of what had happened. But Obama didn't give statements. He didn't need to. His silence was its own message. Calm, deliberate, and confident. Back inside, Trump sat down, surrounded by advisors who tried to comfort him. It's fine. Sir, one of them whispered. He embarrassed himself, not you. But Trump barely heard them. His thoughts were elsewhere, circling back to Obama's words, the look in Ivanka's eyes, the murmurs from the crowd. For a man who built his life on projecting invincibility, the seed of doubt was the one thing he could not afford. And that seed had just been planted in front of cameras, in front of the world. As the break ended, the event continued. But the energy never recovered. Every speaker that followed felt like background noise compared to what had already happened. The audience clapped out of politeness, but their minds weren't there. They were still replaying the confrontation, wondering what it meant. When the event finally ended, Trump left quickly, surrounded by security. He didn't stop for pictures, didn't wave to the crowd. His jaw was tight, his expression unreadable, but his pace was brisk, almost anxious. The confidence he had worn so proudly at the start of the evening was gone. People left the hall in small groups, whispering in hushed tones. Some defended Trump, others admired Obama's composure. But no matter which side they were on, everyone agreed on one thing. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. It wasn't just a political clash, it was a collision of two worlds. One built on noise and the other on calm certainty. And in that collision, Trump's bluster met its match. In the days that followed, the story spread quietly, retold in boardrooms, dinner tables, and private conversations. Everyone had their version of what they thought happened, but the feeling was the same. Something had shifted. Trump might have been the president, but that night it was Obama who had commanded the room. His exit wasn't a retreat. It was a statement, a silent reminder that power isn't always about who holds the microphone, but about who leaves their words echoing long after they're gone. As the lights dimmed in the hall and the last guests drifted out into the night, one truth remained. No matter how loudly Trump tried to reclaim the moment, the silence Obama left behind spoke louder than anything he could ever say.